So, here we are on week 3 of module 2, and we're talking about foundations, of course. And what we're saying is that foundations are not just a slab of concrete, right? The walls, the rooms, they're built in, they're designed in to the foundation. And we're saying that those rooms make relationships. Each room is like a new relationship, and that those relationships bring responsibilities. In this session, you'll also hear the idea about identity. Where does it come from? We're saying that God created your roles as mum, as dad, as brother, as sister, and so on, and that those are God-created roles, and that's where you find your identity. We're also saying that your foundation is complete when nothing anyone can say or do can have you acting out. That's a complete foundation. Now, you'll also hear a little bit of personal testimony in this session around the idea of addiction and reverse addiction. There's a lot in it, so I hope you get a lot out of it. We are in the third week talking about foundation. And as you know, there's 4 stages. We've got new people here tonight, so I'm going to go through it for a minute. 4 stages to recovery, 4 stages to progress, 4 stages to improvement. And those stages we liken to buying or building a new house. And this is a good metaphor, we know, because Jesus used it. It's Matthew 7, verse 24. He said, "Therefore, if anyone hears these words of mine and puts them into practice, he's like a wise man who built his house upon the rock. But if anyone hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice, he is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand." So I knew when I first started, this is the best metaphor. And as you can see, some of you have been around a while, it works, it runs, and the more we apply it, the more we get into it, the better it works. Now we have some principles here that we try and run the group on. And the first one is you'll never be asked what your problem is. And you know, those of you who've been around a while, you know there's a good reason for that. And that's because we want to return to a biblical view of ourselves. And we don't realize necessarily how much that view has been tainted and changed by our culture. So our biblical view is very different from what we might call the medical model. And the medical model says that we're one thing and that we're sometimes this, sometimes that, becoming this, used to be that, and so on. But the biblical view is very different. It says that we are 2 things, and they are both within us simultaneously, that we are both spirit and flesh. And that these 2 things have very different, wildly different views of life. They see the world in very, very different ways. And if you don't know this, and if you don't start from that position, any teaching, I'm making a bold statement now, right? Any teaching, whether you hear it from the pulpit or the classroom or a book or anywhere else, no matter how good that teaching is, it will have a tendency to lead you into conflict because you've not started from the right place. Now, I know that some of you have been around a while, you realize that now already, right? But, you know, I always say, if you go to the Trafford Centre or somewhere and you say, you know, I want to get to Boots, okay? What is the most valuable thing? When you look at that map, you go to the, you know, there's a little map, isn't there, right? Right? Yeah. There's somebody been around a while. They're not all newcomers, right? The most valuable piece of information on that map is you are here. If you don't have that, you don't have nothing. Doesn't matter, you can even know where Boots is, it doesn't help you, right? So that's my point. If we don't start from the right place, we're not going to get to a good place. Okay? So how do we stay away from these medical models? And I'm not saying medicine. Medicine's fantastic. I'm saying medical model, which the Bible calls man's wisdom, right? Which the Bible says is folly to God. Man's wisdom, as clever as it is, as clever as we can get, is folly to God. You look in Isaiah. Isaiah also says, God speaking through him, he says, my ways are higher than your ways as the sky is above the earth. So, one of the ways we stay away, if we can, from this medical model is we put these 4 principles into play. And one of them is you'll never be asked what your problem is, because what's the first thing the doctor asked you? Right? So that's the place we stay away from. We don't start with a problem. What do we start with? Maybe I was being a bit hopeful there. I said, expecting it. Yes, thank you. What's right with us, right? Look how different that starting point is, right? What does Ephesians 2:10 say? You are God's masterpiece. You are at the pinnacle of his creation. You are at the very top of everything he created. That sounds a bit different to what seems to be the trouble, doesn't it? Right? So you'll never be asked what your problem is. You can share it with us. You can tell us. You can talk about these things, but we won't ask you. It's your choice. As it is your choice to do something different or to stop doing what you've been doing. Because we won't tell you. I won't tell you to stop this, start that. It will be your choice, because as a therapist, I know that you're always working with your understanding, not mine. So it's your understanding that will lead you, not mine. So the better you can understand, the better you can make decisions. But if somebody starts making decisions for you, it just leads to dependency. Right? You start feeling comfortable because you're just getting told what to do. But you've got to make your own decisions. Also, you'll be able to go at your own pace. I just feel so privileged that I have this space to be able to say, right, we're not going to do this for 6 weeks, we're going to do it for a year. We're going to go into every little place of detail, and we're going to research things, we're going to explore things, and we're not going to rush through it and say, right, we've ticked these boxes, on we go. We're going to say, no, what's going on? Let's explore that. Let's stay with that, right? So, we hopefully will let you go at your own pace, and if anybody feels I'm going too fast or wants to stay with something, please tell me. Because I do get a bit excited and I have a tendency to rush off. You know, I sometimes train therapists and counsellors to do work with addiction, for instance, and it's something I warn them about. I say, look, it's all very well driving off, and then you see in your wing mirror, you know, nobody got on the bus. They're still at the bus stop, and you think you're doing great, but there's nobody got on, right? So we have to be on board with everything. And I know these ideas that, you know, they're challenging. They're not obvious. Sometimes they seem to be sacrilegious or contradictory, and we need to work through those things. Some of you have seen my YouTube channel where we see a playlist called The 7 Hurdles. Anybody seen that? Right? And you'll see that a lot of these things that when we're trying to pull ourselves away from man's wisdom, these are the 7 hurdles that I see us as difficult to get over. So do visit that. Finally, you'll be offered a Bible-based method of growth. Those of you who've been here a while, is this Bible-based? Yeah. Right? Are we on solid ground here? Right? If you find that I'm saying something that doesn't seem to come from the Bible, please tell me. So, what is our main scripture over the whole course, the whole session? Romans 12, verse 2. I will not stop talking about it. You'll hear me talk about it every week, right? We know now the difference between conforming and transforming, don't we? Right? Conforming is shaping yourself to a system.
I think that's my next tattoo.
Right? Transforming is rearranging yourself. Remember, when something's transformed, nothing is added. We have a mind and we have a brain. And we call this the front room and the back room. We try and keep things very, very simple here, okay? The rearranging is that when your brain's been in charge and your mind is quiet, well, you need to get it the other way around. We need you in charge of your life. What's the point of it? Well, it says here, then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is. Imagine if you knew that. Think about the boldness, think about the confidence. If you knew what God's will was, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. I think it's 2 Corinthians 2:18 that talks about transformation as well, and it basically says what transformation is you're being made in the image of Christ. In other words, transformation is becoming more Christ-like. That's what it means, right? So, here we are talking about foundation. Now, we've done our prep. We've looked at the three big questions. When you're buying a house or you're moving house, what would be the three questions you're going to ask? Cost, location, design. Right? We've looked at those. We've looked at what is the cost of making this change in my life? Am I willing to pay it? What kind of location do I want to live in? Which relationships am I moving away from? Which ones am I moving closer to? Is it my design? Is it something that I want in my life? Or is it someone else's design that I'm going to resent living in and I'm going to pull it down? These are the three big questions. If you haven't completed your prep yet, please don't move on to the next stage, right? Because until you've asked those questions, that's why this is sequential and hierarchical. We do preparation, then we do foundation, then we do ground floor, then we do first floor. If you do it the wrong way around, it tends to go wrong. I know in some people's lives, you've just seen the problem, what you think is the problem, and you've run at it and you said, I've got to get this right, and there's no preparation, and what happens? The wheels come off and we can feel worse. So, having done the prep, we're ready to start building. And, we talked last week a little bit about what a foundation is. We talked about solidity and we talked about stability. So solidity is the foundation, the quality of it being able to withstand what you're going to build on it. It's going to be able to take the weight. It's going to be able to be solid. Right? So depending on what you're trying to build, depends on what kind of foundation you want to build. Right? So if you start to get ideas about God's will for you, ministry ideas, or career ideas, whatever it is that you see in your life that you want, then you've got to build a foundation that can stand that. But at the same time, we don't want to build foundation that's way, way too strong for the little life that we actually want for ourselves. You don't need a foundation for a skyscraper if you're building a semi, right? It works both ways. So stability is slightly different. It's what happens with solidity when the weather goes bad. It's not always sun shining, right? So in Matthew 7:24 that I mentioned, what does he talk about when he's talking about this house, the one built on the rock, the one built on the sand? He's talking about the rains came down, the streams rose, and the wind blew. The one stood and the other one fell down with a mighty crash. That's stability. That's the difference, right? We should prepare for trouble. We should build for trouble. Why? Because John 16:33 says, you're going to have it. You're going to have it. Guaranteed. Right? Anybody who has come into Christianity and the truth, but with the idea that my life's going to be great now because now I'm a believer. I am the worst for this. I'm talking about 40 odd years ago, but I still remember it very well, because in those days, I was still quite a young man then, and I was still trying to make my mark on the world, and I wanted to be the best at my chosen profession, my game. I wanted to be the best in the world. And I wanted it beyond all hope and dreaming, as they say, you know. And when I stopped drinking and taking drugs, and they told me it was a spiritual thing and God would help me and all this kind of stuff, my selfish, egotistical thinking of my parts and my flesh was, well, now I've got God on my side, right? God's on my team now. I'm definitely going to be successful, right? And I can see some smiles because you're identifying with me, right? God hasn't joined your team. You've joined his team. That's a bit of an about turn, isn't it? Well, I found that out, right? And God is patient with us and he's merciful, right? But that was my attitude. I tended to think that way. So if we think about that bad weather, it's guaranteed, okay? And everybody has a different kind. Everybody's lives are unique. But if we build as if every day is going to be sunny, we're going to have a crash. So, what did we talk about last week? Just to cover this idea, we said that foundations include the idea of rooms. You don't just build a slab of concrete and build on it. It's got all the rooms, and the design of the house is already built into the foundation. So foundations make rooms. In other words, you have to decide, what rooms do I want in this house? Family rooms, work rooms, my room, you know? My relationship room. Whatever you want in there, and we do a little exercise where we take a drawing and we say, that's our time, the limitations of that house, that's our whole time, and we do rooms based on how much time do I want to spend in my life in this room, and so on. You're designing something, and then you're moving towards it. So we say foundations make rooms, and we say rooms make relationships, and we say relationships bring responsibilities. That's the process of a foundation, right? So what you're thinking about, which may be different to what you've been thinking about, is the idea that this foundation ultimately ends up with your responsibility. What is my responsibility in this room, in this room? And there's a good reason for it. It's because God cares more, in terms of your identity, he cares more about your role than he does your vision, your dreams, your ambitions, and all of that carry on, right? People struggle with identity. People struggle with the idea of who am I, and I've got to find myself, and all these kind of questions. As if they're massive questions, they're very, very simple. If you understand your identity through the role that God's given you, we're going to go into this a bit later. But the idea of defining a foundation is where we are now. What does it really do? Well, most of you know that this course was originally written for people in rehabs. We're just talking about that, right? So it has got that leaning, but we've since, of course, broadened it out, and it's worked in a broader context. But my definition of a well-built foundation, in other words, how do we know when we've finished it? It remains the same. I would say your foundation is complete when nothing anyone can say or do can make you act out. That's when you know you're ready to build on top of it. Until then, you're not. I know life goes on and you're already in your life and all the rest of the things, but in the theoretical side of this, you'd say, actually, until that is complete. Now, if you look at most approaches towards recovery, for instance, from addictive lifestyle, they would say that's way too advanced, because we've not even started building yet, and you're already talking about sobriety. You're already talking about a changed life. But to me, that makes sense, because I don't see alcohol and drugs as the problem. I see them as the solution to the problem, which then becomes a problem in itself, right? So the idea that we are clean living, it's Psalm 86:11. David says, God create in me an undivided heart, right? And he's talking about righteousness and purity. We become clean before we even start building, right? So nothing anyone can say or do can make me act out. And acting out is different for everybody. If you are having problems with drink, drugs, illicit medication, relationships, gambling, whatever it is, that's your acting out. If you're on the reverse side of addiction, as I call it, right, and you're addicted to helping others, for instance, then your acting out is doing too much. You know, it's exhausting yourself, it's draining yourself, it's being around people who are draining the life out of you, who have what in psychiatry they call a bottomless pit. Something that cannot be filled no matter what you throw in it, right? And you're having the life sucked out of you, and you think you're doing them some spiritual thing. So you can see what your acting out would be. It's different for everybody, okay? But just take a moment to think about this definition.
Can you be both? Can you display both?
Yeah, I was just going to ask that.
Both sides, reverse and addicts.
You're getting me at it now. Yes, you can. In fact, most people do, right? So let me just give you a brief, I'll just take 5 minutes on this, okay? Because they're not medical concepts, okay? So, number one, everyone starts out as a reverse addict, right? So, in other words, any dysfunction in the family, I'm going into therapy a bit now, but just to give you an idea of this, any dysfunction in the family produces the reverse addict. Why? Because dysfunction places a burden on the child that the child doesn't really know what to do with, but they get this sense, I've got to do something. Or there's something missing in this family, something's not working, and a little child will still have that sense that I've got to do something. And this produces, or it's the birth, if we like, of the reverse addict. Take that person forward to maybe mid-teens, somewhere around about there, and some people who have a certain type of brain will find an escape from that burden. The needle will flip, I call it flipping, right? Straight over. They can escape into selfishness, right? So the burden of needing to help everybody, of having always to say yes, of feeling drained all the time, you can escape that by just thinking about you, right? And that produces the addict. So any addict is a reverse addict waiting to get out, right? Now you can go to very expensive rehabs where they don't even understand that, I can assure you, right? So they're always trying to treat the addiction, but they don't realize the real recovery is from the reverse addiction, right? So yes, they can feel it, and there's two kinds of flipping, just to give you an idea, because I know you're interested in this stuff, right? So there's two kinds of flipping. There's like a major flip, if you like, and a minor, right? So the major flip is when you are in recovery, right? So let's say, for instance, an addict goes to rehab. They find some level of recovery, and then they get sent home, and then what happens? Things start to go wrong. But things don't start to go wrong because they're an addict. Things start to go wrong because of the reverse side. Because as soon as they lose their escape, they lose their magic fluid that will get them out of here, the pressures of reverse addiction come back. Now I've got to help everybody again, and it wears you down again, and you soon find your escape again. And if you don't understand that, you're in a revolving door. And I've seen so many in that door, right? But there's also a minor flip. And this is also very interesting because you can work with this daily. The minor flip is is a relational idea. In other words, it's based on who you're with, right? So let's say you've got an addict type brain, right? And then you meet somebody who's very much on the reverse side. You'll tend to be attracted to them because the opposites, right? You'll tend to be attracted, and you'll tend to go more addict the more reverse they are. You'll kind of mirror them, which is why we call it mirrored addiction, right? If you meet somebody who's very much an addict selfish side, you may even flip over to the reverse side. I'll tell you a little story about this. When I used to play snooker all the time, we used to go to professional qualification tournaments, and we would be in somewhere like Butlins in Pwllheli or something in middle of February, blinking freezing, you know, there's nobody else there. But there'd be 2,000 young snooker players there all trying to win this thing. By the time you were through about 4 rounds, there'd be about 6 of you there. Everybody's gone home, right? Try and be in Butlins in the middle of February, nobody there, right? But what would happen is, strange thing, I would be married at home, and I wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't lift a finger, because I hadn't been trained to lift a finger. I'd been trained it was going to get done for me. So I didn't do anything. But then I would go to these competitions, and we would always share the chalets. There might be 6 of us in there, right? And the moment we arrived, I'd turn into like a housewife or something. It was the most extraordinary. I didn't understand it for years. I would get there, I'd say, right, what are we having for tea? I'll nip out to the shop, I'd buy all the food, I'd start cooking for everybody, making them all drinks. And then I'd go home and I'd return into this selfish, do you see what I mean? That's a minor flip, right? So think relationally, which is why in the foundation we have all these rooms. Because you've got to look at each relationship in particular, specifically. Put the walls in so that you're not just blurring everything. You're saying, in this room, is the foundation solid? Or is there anything? Could they say this? Could they do that? And, oh, that's too much, right? Now, that's not a crime. That's just a reality. So we're not a success. We're not a failure. We just work with that, okay? But knowing it is so valuable, right? And by putting these type of foundations in your design, you say, well, that's in this relationship. But you know, in this relationship, I'm fine, right? In this room, I'm great. But, ooh, over here, right? So we get more specific. Does that make sense? Right? So your foundation is not complete until you can say, and you can only be honest with yourself, right? Because you'll know that nothing anyone can say or do, right? Now, don't mistake this. I'm not saying nothing anyone can say or do won't upset me. I'm not saying it won't make me feel bad. I'm not saying it won't hurt me. I'm saying it won't make me act out. There's a big difference, okay? So that's our definition. And as I've said, foundations make rooms, rooms make relationships. That's when we look at them specifically. Relationships make responsibilities. So this idea of role, do you understand what I mean by role? Right? We're all here, sisters, brothers, daughters, sons, mums. You understand? We've all got a role. Maybe several, right? And I'm saying that God takes these roles very seriously. So let's look at these ideas of foundation, rooms, and so on. I've already talked about Matthew 7:24. When Jesus talks about building your house upon the rock, he's saying building your life upon the Word of God. What does it say in the Bible? What does God say about this? You may not understand it all, but God says this is the way to do it. So we use Matthew 7:24 for that. Your relationships are built on that word. In other words, the way you put the rooms in, right, is built on the word that you're putting your life on, right? So I don't know if you've ever seen Psalm 127, but I used to work in the travel business, and we were putting up an exhibition in Leeds Town Hall one day, and there's this huge dome if you've ever been. It's quite impressive, you know, with a big painting mural thing on it. But around, letters a foot high, going all the way around the collar of this dome, I saw Psalm 127. It says, "Lest God build this house, he labors in vain that builds it." It's very impressive when you see it like that, in that context, you know. Find it in your Bible, right? What are we saying? We're saying if God's not building it, you're wasting your time. You can try as hard as you want. You can build the most beautiful looking thing. You can be such a do-gooder person. You can be sacrificial. You can be self-righteous. You can be moral. You can be all these kind of... You are wasting your time. If God doesn't build it, right, And it goes on to say, it isn't round the dome, but it does go on to say, you know, if God doesn't watch, then the watchers are, you know, it's talking about people watching the city, right? It's saying, no, you're not going to be safe. So Psalm 127, wonderful stuff. Your responsibilities are made clear. Now, this is where we get into roles. Now, there's many situations, many examples of this, but I want to impress upon you the idea, and especially anyone who's wondering about their identity, who they are, you know, this kind of thing. I told you about that, I used this story last week, Dan, about Michelangelo and carving the David, right? And his attitude was, you just have to get rid of everything that's not David, and you're left with your statue, right? Which is a very different attitude, saying, how do we make a David? He said, no, you just have to remove everything that isn't David. And if you remove everything off your life that isn't God, what's left is you, right? But this is another idea from Proverbs 31. I don't know if you've ever read it, but it's a phenomenal thing. It's actually, the title of it is The Sayings of King Lemuel. And it starts, in fact, I think I can show it you. Right, so your identity is built on your role. Let me show you this one first. Yeah. It starts here, Proverbs 31, listen, my son, listen, son of my womb, listen, my son, the answer to my prayers. This is a mum talking to a son. He's the king. So really the idea is leadership. And if you read 31, you'll see it's phenomenal in terms of role. She's mum, right? And she's saying, don't bother with this, don't be drunken, don't be that, be kind to people. You know, she's saying this is what good leaders do. She's being a mum, right? That's her role. It goes on, what does it say? A woman of noble character who can find, right? So King then goes on to talk about his role as king and finding a wife. So these are roles. Proverbs 22 verse 6 is another example of this. Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. That's a role quote. That's parental, isn't it? It's talking to parents, right? This is how much God is concerned with your role in life.
Don't always turn out that way. I brought all 5 of mine up the same and they couldn't be more different.
Yeah, they're different people. Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, of course. And God loves variety like that.
I don't bloody love variety. I want a quiet life.
What did we say about suffering before? Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, expect it. So, and the most poignant of all, this is Jesus on the cross. This is literally Jesus crucified. But before he gives up his last breath, I'm okay. Let's have a hug.
Oh, Dave, there's only one Dave.
Come on.
Oh.
Come on. I tell you what, it's rare that I can get through that. It's rare I can get through that. I'm going again now. That's a role. He's saying, woman, this is his mum. He's saying, woman, here is your son. And to the disciple, this is John, he says, here is your mother. It says, and from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. That's a role. Now, if anybody here has not put role at the top of their identity, just think about that. Just give that a thought. Right? We're not perfect. We're not going to do it perfectly. Right? That's not the point. The point is, this is God's design. He designed the family. He designed the marriage. He designed relationships. And so if you're struggling with, who am I? What do I want to do? What's my career? What's my vision, my dream, and all this? And you feel empty and no contentment, it's because there's no role. And it's hard, I think it's not an easy thing to think of this as important. I would say that or at least what I found in my life is that the phase of life that you're in, you have to find what's new. What is the thing that wasn't in the previous phase? What's different? How can I get involved in that? We become grandparents, and there's new stuff in there that hasn't been in my life previously, and it's quite wonderful, but you have to get into it. You have to say, well, this is my role now. I have a new role. Does this make sense?
So in this section, we're going to talk about the way we align the parts that we have with the disciples in the Bible, how very similar they are, and more about working with your parts and how to do that. And really the idea that this word trust is the most important word in all of discipling. We talk about how they don't always get on. Well, the disciples didn't, and neither do your parts. And so you should expect that. And then we go into a much deeper dive into the concept, the biblical idea of double-mindedness. So again, I hope you get a lot from this.
Let's hear any sharing or any feedback on what we've said so far. I know I tend to go through these things at a fair lick. Anything troubling anyone, or want more exploration or more explanation? Right? So if we think of it as starting with what we call a part, brackets, disciple, right? So in therapy we call it a part. In this approach we call it a disciple, right? So if you look at the disciples, if you start studying the Gospels, I encourage you to do it, to look at anything where Jesus is discipling specifically. But of course, he's pretty much discipling everybody, so you can more or less use any of it. But if you look at the disciples themselves, they were very different, right? So when we first start thinking about our parts and discipling them, I would be looking at the disciples and saying, which disciple does this part remind me of? All right? Now, the disciples had different traits. Some of them wanted to attack the Romans, the zealots as they were called. Some of them wanted to work with the Romans, tax collecting. Some of them wanted to ignore the Romans, just get on with your life, All these attitudes were prevalent, and you can see different attitudes in your parts, because there'll be different ages, there'll be different levels of understanding, and they'll have traits, right? But if you are feeling your qualities of self, that's a therapeutic term. In the Bible, we'd call it your Christ-mindedness. That's what the Bible calls it, right? In therapy, we say these things that you might feel dropping away are calm. Everybody know these now, right? Calm, clear, curious, creative, confident, courageous, connected, and compassionate. This is what therapy works out is your authentic nature. And as a spiritual thing, it's untainted by your experience. It's not touched by your experience. No matter how abused you've been, no matter how neglected you've been, you have a perfect, authentic self. The Bible has one word to replace those 8 words. That word is? Christ-like. Christ-like, well, we call it peace. Right? When Jesus turns up after he has risen in the upper room, which is all locked, by the way, no one can get in, and he just appears there, what does he say? Peace be with you. Right? That covers all 8 words. But remember that he says, I give you my peace, he said, not as the world gives. What he's telling you is it's a spiritual thing, not a fleshly thing. It's not because everything's going great. It's not because everything's going your way. In fact, everything might be going against you in life, because it's peace that passes all understanding. In other words, it doesn't make sense. That's what the song says. All right? I've got peace that doesn't make sense. Why does it not make sense? Because, in a world, if I just one thing, I just feel terrible. Right? So the idea of traits, when you feel these 8 things, or your Christ-mindedness, your peace dropping away, that's your first sign that your brain is taken over. What it's doing is it's washing you with chemicals to make you act. And the act it wants is the act of making you safe. It's trying to get you out of danger, because it perceives you to be in danger, not because you are, you might not be, but because you have trained it, or life has trained it, that this thing is dangerous. And once your brain believes that, it will act in that situation, even if it's not dangerous at all. For instance, something that might be quite dangerous to you as a 5-year-old isn't dangerous as a 30-year-old. But your brain still acts as if it is. Does that make sense? It's training. And when you look at the disciples, they were all trained in different ways. Like, what do we know? We know that they were traumatized. If you have any idea what it might be like to be occupied as a country. We've never been occupied here in England. But we've been to France where they were occupied, and we saw what it was like. We saw the photographs. Imagine opening your front door and there's Nazi troops marching down the street. Think about it for a minute. That's what they were living in. The Romans were occupying Israel. They were traumatized, and they were oppressed by the church. The church was ripping them off. It was a racket, an absolute racket, right? So imagine being oppressed and traumatized. That's what they were dealing with. Okay? So when you feel these things dropping away, that's when you know the brain's taking over through training. And what you're doing is you're starting a journey of discipling that part. Not hating it, not fighting it, not pretending it doesn't exist, not minimizing it, not trying to cover it with alcohol or drugs or chemicals, not trying to act out, but trying to say, you are welcome here. And I know why you're doing this, and I get it, but you can trust me. And that's what Jesus was saying to the disciples. You can trust me.
Can I just say, that part when you said about your different parts at different ages have been traumatised by different things, and so they will make you think that things are dangerous when they're not.
Yes.
Because it might have been dangerous to his 5-year-old.
Yes.
That's just clicked with me. I've noticed this year. I'm not going to say what my phobias and fears were, but I had some severe phobias and fears, and I noticed all this year them fears and phobias are not there at all anymore. And I think that the phobias, when you said they were different ages and it was dangerous at that time, a lot of my phobias that I had were developed as a child at different stages in life through different events.
Yeah.
And yeah, am I making sense?
Yeah,
of course. I'm not scared of the things that I'm scared of, but I'd got so used to telling myself, oh, that happened to me when I was 5, and I've got to be terrified of it for the rest of my life now because I wasn't 5. Now I'm not. Now that I've got peace and contentment, I don't feel frightened or phobic of certain things anymore. I realise it was a childhood thing, and it's not dangerous, it's not going to hurt me, and I don't need to be scared of it anymore.
When we notice these things, and this is what we call, in therapy, we call this rewiring, right? In biblical terms, it's transformation, right? Or it also talks about overcoming. right?
Because the phobias I had were the type of phobias that people will go to hypnotherapy for because
Sure.
they're that severe.
Absolutely.
Like they make me ill.
Yeah.
The phobias.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm not even bothered by them at all anymore.
So remember that when we're talking about parts, at least the parts we're talking about, right? They are designed to get you out of a burning building. What does that mean? It means they're not interested in the consequences, right? I was talking to a client about this very day and saying, look, understand this. If your child was in a burning building and the fireman comes and destroys the building to get the child out, you don't care, do you? You don't care. Because the aim is to get the child out. We don't care about the consequences. Well, neither does your brain. It gets you to do things in this moment to get you out of trouble, and the consequences could be disastrous. Your brain says, my work here is done.
Yeah.
Right? Successful.
To rationalise the mess after.
Doesn't have to, because it doesn't exist in time. There's no timeline back here. It's always now. So they don't think about the future, doesn't think about the consequences, right? The timeline is here in your mind. It's not in your brain. The neuroscientists say the amygdala can't tell the time. I always put it this way. I say if your brain had a watch on, it would just say now. It's just always now, all right? So don't ever expect any of your parts to have wisdom or to think in terms of long-term, consequences. It's always a quick fix. It's one of the ways you understand your parts. And when your brain's taken over, what do we know? It's always naive. It's always radical. And it's always immediate. You look for those three things in the strategies of your brain, and you will recognize when you're not in charge. Right? When you read the Bible, you never mistake Jesus for the disciples, do you? It's pretty clear which one's which, isn't it? And when you hear what they say, well, it's going to be that clear to you as you keep doing your training and keep doing your progress. You will know instantly when that's not you. Right? And you'll be able to take action straight away. Your brain is not going to lead you into a good life. So, any other comments, questions? Clive?
The different parts that we had, can there be different aspects to the same parts?
So, can they be different at different times?
When we were 10 years old,
Yeah.
we were all sorts of stuff.
Right.
10.
Yeah. Can they be different at different times? Can they present in different ways? Yeah. Good question. Right? Is that the question? Yeah. Okay. So, when the initial way of understanding a part, what's in therapy would call a part, is to think about a photograph. Think about a snapshot. If you have a photograph, like when I say to people, if they've established they've got a part that's say 7 years old, I say, have you got a photograph of yourself as a 7-year-old? If it's yes, I say, put it by your bedside and look at it every day, because when you're talking to that part, you're talking to that photograph. Right? Parts or your brain's activity is extremely consistent. So when a part turns up, it turns up the same way every time. But when you get different reactions, you're talking about different parts. Right? It's part of the reason why we understand discipling as our model, that God has left us, right? That there were 200 or more disciples. He prayed all night and chose 12. And in that 12, there were 3 that were more closer. And of that 3, there was 1 that he loved. Right? So we've got all this variety. And you have that variety in your parts. But if you were to go to an IFS therapist, you'd have parts coming out your ears. But I'm only interested in the ones that cause us trouble. So we can start. I would always say everybody would know a part of them that is the one that really needs to be dealt with, the one that I really know that's causing me a lot of trouble. We at least would know one. We can start there, right? So the other thing you get is what we call polarized parts. And again, they'll present differently, but they're different parts. So, for instance, I was talking to somebody about this today because they've got a part that gets fed up when the partner goes out and the part sort of saying, well, they're going out and enjoying themselves, and here I am ironing. You know, I'm fed up with it, but I don't complain. But there's another part that says, no, I'm a princess and I'm supposed to be having a great time. And these parts don't like each other, because one of them wants to keep it low and the other one wants to build it up, right? So they don't like each other. Now, if you read the Gospels, you'll find that disciples didn't like each other either. It's completely consistent, right? Luke wasn't a Jew. They didn't like it, right? Matthew, who was Levi, was a tax collector. They hated his guts, right? What did Jesus say a lot? He will come up to them and say, what are you lot grumbling about? Right? They're having a go. And it says, well, they were arguing about who was the greatest of them, right? So all of this stuff, you'll find it's completely consistent when you internalize it, right? So every time you feel something that is a reaction from your brain, realize that is a part. And when that part shows up, it will show up in the same way every time. So that you can get used to it and you can say, oh, you're here. I know who you are, right? So, any other things we want to question, or just, are we understanding a foundation? Are we understanding how strong a thing it is we're talking about? Right? Remember, what is seen is built on what is unseen. Right? It's very powerful. If you're in this just to see what you can get out of it, you will not build a good foundation. Because who's interested in building something no one even going to see? Right? Only when you're genuine. Only when you're a genuine searcher and seeker will you do what what Jesus says in Matthew 7:24 and actually build something substantial. Because no one comes to your house and says, what a lovely foundation you've got here. Right? They see the curtains and they see the carpets and stuff like that, but they don't see the foundation. They don't see the wiring in the walls. They don't see whether you've skimped on something or whether you've put the best quality in there. You can talk about materials all night long, right? Let's talk a little bit about double-mindedness, because the question might be, how many ways does the Bible have of talking about the spirit and the flesh? You know, this starting point that we keep talking about, that we shouldn't start with what's wrong with us, but we should say, why are we a masterpiece? What's going on here? And to say, the starting point is to understand that we have this duality within us that's continually on the go. Well, double-mindedness is one of those ways. There are many ways. Have you heard of double-mindedness before? If you've read the Bible, you know about this, right? So, I quoted Psalm 86, verse 11 before, and I'm interested in it because it's not New Testament. We're going back to the Psalms, right? This is not something that just came along when Jesus came along. The Bible's talking about it all along. And David says, create in me an undivided heart. What is the division?
Conflict.
Right? What are we dividing? Flesh and spirit. Right? Undivided means make me whole. It means make me harmonious. Make me unified. And what does John 17:20, what's Jesus praying for? Unity. Right? He's saying, as you, Father, are in me, I shall be in them, and they shall be in us. And this pattern just goes on and on and on. It never ends. Because the same spirit that lives in you lives in your parts. Because it's you. So you see that pattern going on, right? Create in me an undivided heart. That's not a conflicted message, is it? That's not saying, let me beat off all these bits of me. No, let me be undivided, right? Let's remind ourselves that our journey of inner discipling is a journey from Matthew 7:11 to John 15:5. 15. In Matthew 7:11, he's just finished the Beatitudes in Matthew 5. He's teaching the disciples, and he calls them evil to their face. You remember this? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, and so on, right? This is the disciples he's talking to that create all of Christianity for him when he's gone, and he says, you're my hands and my feet, right? They're evil though. So if all we do is fight evil and hate it, and right, where does discipleship come from? Try and work that one out, right? And we're getting all the way in that journey across to John 15:15 when he says, I no longer call you servants or slaves, right? I call you, but they're evil though, aren't they? But they're friends. Now this gives us an insight into the true nature of evil, right? The idea that that Jesus takes evil and works with it. And we have to work with it in us, right? This is a difficult idea, right? And I'm not saying that there aren't bits of evil that we don't want to work with, because there are. And guess what? It's in the model. It's actually built into the model. Wasn't there a disciple that was kicked out? Isn't that right? And didn't Jesus choose him? Which shows you that it's intentional, it's purposeful. He's saying, yeah, but there are the odd bit that you don't want to work with. That's a different thing. And if you have anything like that, as Charlie will say, go to the elders, have it prayed out. That's what the Bible tells you to do, right? But the rest we work with, because it's us. Is that fair? So, one of the ways that we struggle to understand and begin to work with our parts and disciples is that we don't realize they can imitate things. Imitation is a big part of reverse addiction, certainly. You remember I was talking earlier about the dysfunction in the family putting the weight, the burden of responsibility on the child to do something. I've got to fix something here. I've got to take action, right? Well, that's where, as a young child, they might learn to imitate being a grown-up. A child can't be a grown-up. They haven't got the experience, they haven't got the wisdom, they haven't got the understanding, but they can watch, they can learn, they can imitate. How many people do we know that act grown up, but they're not? That's imitation. We learn it as a child, right? And your parts can learn to imitate things, good things, like contentment, like calmness, right? So it can be confusing, it can be difficult to ascertain when am I being triggered here? Is this me? Is it not me? I remember talking to you about this situation. It's not the only time it happened. But I was working with a couple, and she's talking about him. And she's talking away, and she's saying, I'm always anxious, and I'm always on the go and everything, but he's the calmest person. He's so laid back. I can't be like that, but I'm all jumpy. And I'm looking at him. And I said, when she'd finished, I said, you're not calm at all, are you? And he said, no, not really. But you see, his parts learned to imitate calmness. He'll look calm. She thought he was calm. She was married to him. But he wasn't. I remember as a teenager, some of my friends saying, you're the most laid back person I've ever met. The last thing I was laid back. But I learned how to look laid back. So, imitation, right? In therapy, I should have really said incongruence, but it's a congruence, right? It's called congruence or incongruence, right? In the Bible, it's called double-mindedness. What is incongruence? It's the imitation of a part. In other words, it's presenting something that you don't feel. When I'm presenting calmness, but inside I'm all anxious, that's incongruent. Does that make sense? I know it comes from a mathematical idea of a triangle that if you chop it in half, it's the same both sides. So congruence is feeling what you're presenting. Now, when you are in your authentic Christ-minded self, you feel what you present. If you're presenting anger, it's because you're angry. If you're presenting calmness, it's because you're calm. Right? But if you're presenting something you're not feeling, that's not you. That's the key. That's why I'm talking about it, because it's a key. Right? How many times do you present something that you don't actually feel? Right? Now look, to an extent, for instance, if you have a job, right, we all perform roles. I do it every day, you do it. I mean, the girl behind the desk at the hotel always smiles. She doesn't always feel like smiling, but that's her job. And performing a role is fine, as long as we know what we're doing, and we de-roll and we go home, right? But when it comes to more, shall we say, more profound things, more involved in your life, where you're continually known this way, but really you feel that way, right? This is incongruent. So do you get the idea?
Yeah, I think for me, growing up, everyone always seen me as such a confident and bubbly
There you go.
person, but I was the most insecure, never felt like I fitted in or that anybody really likes me.
Yeah.
All those feelings.
So look at the difference in how you feel and what you present, right? That's a classic key of parts, right? This is safe. Presenting this way is safe. I'll produce that for you. I'll keep you safe, right? Where does it come from? What's our scripture? Romans 7:20.
The word congruence or incongruence, sorry, I'm getting confused, because is that the same as coherent and incoherent? Or is it completely different?
No. Coherence is when what you say can be logically proven or can be true. So you're coherent in your plan or in your speech. It's like logical. But congruent simply means equal or the same as. It's simply the same as. If you take a triangle, what's called a congruent triangle, is it? If you chop it in half, both halves are identical. They're the same. So congruence is about being the same on the inside as you are on the outside. Yes. But the Bible talks about double-mindedness, which is a very different thing. Double-mindedness is the Bible's way of talking about incongruence. So let's look at these scriptures. There's lots of them, by the way, but I'm just giving you three here. Psalm 119, verse 113, that's a difficult one to find, right? James 1, verse 8, you probably heard double-mindedness talked about in James. And James 4, verse 8 are just three good examples. We could give you lots more. So let's go through them. What can we say about people who are double-minded? What would you experience as a double-minded person? What will your lived experience be? It would be instability. So straight away we're back to foundation, aren't we? Right? You produce instability because you're sometimes run by your spirit, you're sometimes run by your flesh. We all know what this feels like because we're all like this. Right? Unstable, you think this one minute, you think this another minute, because you think I'm all over the place, but you're double-minded is what you are.
And we have a phrase that says I'm in two minds, don't we?
We have a colloquialism, I'm in two minds about that. Well, you only got one, right? But Romans 7:20, basically Paul is saying, look, if I do what I don't want to do, it's no longer me or I that does it, but the sinful nature living within me. Now, I know I keep saying this. Can you put it any simpler than that? Is there any way of putting it in black and white simpler than that? He's telling you the simple truth. It's not a complex, profound thing. It's the simple truth. It's not him, and it's not you. Double-minded people should not expect anything from God. Ooh, ow.
Yeah, that's the one that stuck out to me.
Hello.
But it makes sense.
It makes sense because if you...
Makes sense to me, yeah.
Right, because Galatians 5:17 really helps us understand that the spirit and the flesh are separate. They never, ever mix. You cannot mix them. So if you have a fleshly motivation, you'll get a fleshly outcome. If you have a spiritual motivation, you'll get a spiritual outcome, but you can't mix them up. So if you're in the flesh, you can't expect anything from God. Does that make sense? Expect to be blown and tossed by the wind. So straight away back to Matthew 7:24, right? Your house is going to come crashing down if you're double-minded.
Yeah, the thing that made me think about, I mean, I'm also blown and tossed by the wind constantly. But the not expecting anything from God thing stuck to me because
Yes.
it makes me feel called out and challenged, but like in the way I like.
Yeah.
Not like, oh dear, you know, but more like, oh okay, this explains a lot.
I've got
When
some.
I think about like, yeah, because I struggle to balance my flesh self, my spiritual self. It's like what I should do and what I want to do are often opposed. You know, I should kick addictions. I want to smoke. You know, sometimes I'll pray about something and I'll feel like I'm lying as I'm doing it. Because I'm like, am I doing this because this is right and I want this? Or am I doing it because I know it's a good idea and I'm just hoping God will put it there? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, and sometimes also I catch myself, well, rather God convicting me of a thing. Like, you know, I'll be in a situation and I'm thinking, okay, I want it to go this way. But then I'll think, why do I want it to go this way? Oh, it's because I want this. That's a lie. What I actually want is this. And the reason is that. So I don't want that. I won't go near it. You know? And
Yes.
it is a great learning process.
And look, if we can kick success and failure into touch, we can stay in that process, right? But remember, I'm not a success,
I'm a human being and I'm here to learn.
and I'm here to learn, right? But when you jump into that duality of success and failure, you're tossed around like the wind, and by the wind, right? So straight away again, we're back to Matthew 7:24, where we see this thing in clarity. But they have an impure heart. Now this is obvious, really, if you think about it, because as you just said, your flesh wants something and your spirit wants something completely different. This is impure, right? Because they don't actually mix at all. What they do is they just keep jumping in front of one another, right? So when you say to yourself, well, you know, I'm sometimes like this and I'm sometimes like, what you mean is I'm sometimes in the spirit and I'm sometimes in the flesh. That's what you actually mean. Both are extremely consistent. So let's show you why these things are true. It's not because I say them. It's not because I'm telling you. It's because the Word of God says them. All right? So anyone who got a Bible on them, let's have a look at Psalm 119, verse 113.
Oh God, I remember reading that thinking,
When does this end? Right. Let me give you a little tip. If you want to find out, if you want to read Psalm 119 quickly, just read Psalm 19. It's a shortened version of exactly the same thing.
I've read the whole thing.
There's a tip for you.
It's all there for a reason.
So what, anybody got verse 113 if you can find it? It's a tough one to find. Just keep going, you'll get there.
I hate double-minded people, but I love your law.
Right? I hate double-minded people. Right? So, but I love your word. Is that right? I love your law. Your word is your law. It's the same thing. Right? A lot of words are transferable.
That's NIV, mine's...
There's different versions.
Yeah.
Right? But that's where double-mindedness is mentioned. Again, we're in the Old Testament, we're in Psalms. To be double-minded, right? To understand it, it doesn't mean just being deceitful. It means literally having two minds.
NLT's got quite an interesting...
Go for it.
It says, I hate those with divided loyalties, but I love your instructions.
Yeah. So what does divided loyalties mean? Why would you have divided loyalties, right? If you were one thing, you wouldn't. You'd have one loyalty. But if you're two things, you're almost bound to have two, right? Let's have a look at James 1 verse 8. It's a much easier one to find. I love reading different versions, by the way. If you get Bible Gateway on your phone, you can look at one verse in all the English variations, and it's quite interesting.
Can I read this one?
Please.
But not just
Oh, by all means. More Bible, we love it.
If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For let not that man suppose that he will receive anything of the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways.
Right. So you've put it in context for us, right? And you can see they're blown and tossed by the wind. Shouldn't expect anything from God, right? It's all in the Word, okay? And what are we talking about with a foundation? We're saying solid and stable. But you're saying that a double-minded person is unstable in everything they do. So if you want to produce an unstable foundation, have two minds, right? What instead we develop when we follow Christ is we have Christ-mindedness and we have parts that we disciple, right? It's not saying they're not around or they don't have influence on us at times, right? But we know which way it's going. It's going from our Christ-mindedness to our disciples. Instruction, conviction, education, correction.
I was just about to say, I've got a very strong sense of conviction, whereas, a year ago I wouldn't have thought twice about doing something, and I wouldn't have felt, I wouldn't have given a pig's ear about it.
Yeah.
But now, like before I even act, I'm already convicted.
Yeah. It's an amazing thing. Like it's a small thing really, you might say, but I just remember when this happened to me, I suddenly stopped swearing, right? And like anybody else from Lee, I used to swear at least twice a sentence, right? But, right? You know what we're like, right?
Did you say you're from Lee?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, there's lots of us.
I know all about Lee.
Yeah, well, there you go.
That's not where I thought you'd be from.
So it just stopped. Now you might think, you could give all kinds of different reasons for it, but I see it as Christ in me, right? And now I go to places, with my golf club and stuff like that, and they're swearing all over the place, and I can't help but stand out, because I'm not going to do it, right? And so I know that I look different because of that, and that can feel awkward at times, but that's my conviction, right? So that's not unstable. So you find these things, they affect us in different ways. You'll have different experiences, right? But when you notice your vocabulary changing, when you notice your reactions changing, and you know this, you've known yourself all your life, and this is how I react in that situation, and then it just doesn't happen, something's been discipled. Something trusts you to handle it, which is what discipling is.
You learn after a while to differentiate who's running the show, and whether it's the spirit or the flesh.
Well, it's a journey, right? And I always say, look, if it took Jesus, who's God, if it took him 3.5 years, then we should be patient with ourselves. Right?
Yeah. Did your swearing stop like that, you say? Like...
Yeah. I just stopped doing it.
Overnight?
In the same way I stopped drinking and I stopped taking drugs.
Wow.
Right? 41 years, I haven't gone back to it. Yeah. Right? I had, 30 seconds of Holy Spirit experience, and it's still the most important thing that happened to me in my life. And I've been running on that energy for 41 years.
Because with swearing, I'm about 80% of the way there.
Yeah, sure.
It used to be every sentence, now
it's every paragraph.
Yeah, no.
That's like me, I'm the
So
same.
it's better
Got
than
right
thinking
pattern
that. So, what should you call it? Give yourself a pat on the back.
No,
Yeah.
It's like 80-90%, but it's still there.
Listen, we're not a success and we're not a failure, right? We're just learning. Now, don't get me wrong, I've still got parts that swear.
Inside.
Of course. You see, they're still there, right? And not all of them have moved into the Spirit, right? But what happens here is that you start to realize that it's not all about Bible college or something. It's about everything you do in your day, every relationship that you have, right? You can either do it in the flesh or you can do it in the Spirit. You can say to yourself, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, or you can just be blown around and tossed by the wind. Right? So we're all learning this. So that's why we have to be patient with ourselves, be gentle with yourself, because Jesus says, look, my burden is easy. My yoke is light. And right? That's how great a teacher he is. So let's have a look finally at James 4:8, which is another great example. Who wants to read that one out?
Come near to God and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded.
Wow. There it is. Right? Come near to God, he'll come near to you. Make a move. Right? And purify your hearts, you double-minded ones. Right? I mean, it's convicting, isn't it? Right? Because we looked in Psalm 119 at impure hearts. Right? And Psalm 86 is saying, give me an undivided heart, which makes me more pure. Right? So instead of hating ourselves, remember, our journey is from a conflicted self to a harmonized self. That's what John 15:15 is all about. It becomes a team. I hope that builds a little bit more understanding of not to rush into things, but let's put a foundation in first that's going to stand when we build on top of it, because those challenges are coming. Okay? So great to see you again. I hope to see you either on Monday night or next Wednesday. God bless.
So there it is. That is week 3 of module 2. And I hope you feel like you got a lot from that, particularly about the idea of building a good, strong foundation for whatever changes you want to make in your life, as well as learning more about parts and how similar they are to disciples and how we can take that whole model and place it internally for effective way forwards. So, all the best, be blessed, and I'll see you next time.